I want to say welcome to the people who are watching on video. So this whole aspect of citation. So really who our knowledge is linked to. And I think that that's the space that we want to think about, and who are we responsible to? So when we think about those connections, I just want to say one of the things that broke this down so simply for me, and I like to share it a lot, and this comes from my teacher, Shauno, and it also comes from my uncle, Christopher Horstieff. And I think actually, if you look at almost any Indigenous theory out there, I know Leanne Bedesamosaki Simpson talks about this. I think many Indigenous, Daniel Heath Justice, many Indigenous philosophers, writers, thinkers, we all kind of agree on this, but I just mentioned some of them. But essentially, if we break it down, we hear these buzzwords, right? Decolonization, or indigenization, reconciliation, all these buzzwords. But I want to talk about decolonization because I think too often we hear these words and we don't actually think about what does it mean. And so the most simple and succinct thing that I've heard about colonialism, and that I continue to share, and then I pass this on and I ask that you take this one and sit with it, but that colonialism at its heart, what it did was break our connections. And so everything that colonialism did and does today, because it is not, we are not living in a post-colonial world, everything that colonialism does today breaks our relationships to each other, breaks our relationships to our children, breaks our relationships to our land, to each other, to our culture, to our languages, to our concepts of time, to everything that you can, any relationship you can have to our housing, right? To our economies, to all the ways we were running the world, right? And when I say running the world, we weren't actually trying to run it. We were trying to live in harmony, right? So colonialism breaks our relationship. So if we're going to talk about decolonization, and if we're going to talk about indigenization, and if we're going to talk about any of these things, anything that restores our relationship to our culture, our children, our territory, all of these things, that is what decolonization is. And when people often ask me, like, can non-Indigenous people decolonize? And I say, well, I darn well hope so. I haven't met too many people who are doing it that well, but the ones that are trying, we're hoping that they can get there. And I say that because I tend to say some taboo things. Part of being a two-spirit person is that is what we're here to do. We're here to challenge you. So do you think there's only two genders? Surprise. Hi, I'm here and I exist. So sorry if that's complicated for you. And like, do you think that your name is really important? Do you know $137, and as long as it's not hate speech, you can change your name to anything you want, right? So these kind of things that I'm here to challenge your concepts of things that are set in stone. Rainbow react, that's a beautiful, I love it. So these kind of, we're here to challenge. And so one of the things that I challenge, and I'm gonna say this, and I'm always nervous to say this, but there's a great philosopher, Vine Deloria Jr., and a friend of mine has quoted him, and I actually need to go back and do the research and find the book it's in. But he asked the question, so you aren't an Indigenous, but will your kids be? And I think that this is a really, really important question. And 2021, when we're in climate change, when we're in this space, what are you doing to understand the values and the knowledge systems that have been here for 15,000 years, right? To be able to say, like, at what point do we say, okay, this experiment hasn't worked, right? Capitalism hasn't really worked. We did it for 15,000 years. You've had it for 500, and could we throw that? This hypothesis, can we get over it now? Can we move on to going backwards and forwards? And I'm not saying I want you all to leave. I'm not saying I like my houses. I like my internet. I like, my uncle is alive because of insulin. And I think we need to be aware that actually, for example, I just learned that inoculation was taught to someone by a slave, by an African slave. So vaccines actually came from Africa, where they were using that technology, and then it got used here, right? And so how do we actually learn about the fact that most of the things, including like aspirin, was a willow bark, was Indigenous knowledge? So when we say going back, we're not saying back in time, we're saying we've always used everything that is available to us. We've always used every tool that is available to us. And so how do you actually start learning our tools? So for example, the forest fire season this year was devastating. We as Ktunaxa did controlled burning for many, many generations. And that's not something that would have happened at that time. So now we have these issues coming up, and we are constantly, like as the Ktunaxa Nation, we're constantly in negotiations with forestry going, we actually want to tell you which trees you need to cut so that we could save the fire. Like we actually want to have control over some of these things, right? For example, do you know your government just kills bears and throws them in the dump or buries them? We're now trying to say, if a CO is going to have to kill a bear, we actually want it, right? And we want to take it traditionally, and we want to support that thing. So these are like just tiny little things that are my day-to-day life of talking about that we don't think about, because we don't think about different ways to do things. Unfortunately, we are in a terrifying world where social media algorithms and everything have actually taught us to be more polarized. So whenever you're feeling that spark of that anger and that I want to go against something and that I'm right and you're wrong, that piece, we are actually being told to do this through that's what gets the buzz, that's what gets the dopamine hit. And so how do we step back from that and actually go, we have to hold complexities of our world. We have to, and this is a quote from Daniel Heath Justice. He's a Cherokee writer. He's also works at UBC. And so this idea of holding the complexities I think it's like, it was his Twitter handle, but he finally quit Twitter, which I'm very happy about. Because it's like a celebration when our thinkers go away from the social media and start writing books again, because we're like, we want the books, right? So but holding the complexity of everything. And I think what I want to share, and it's interesting, I'm going to share about my family, and I didn't call Dad to ask about this one, but I'm going to share this one. So my dad is a settler Canadian and Scottish descent, and my biggest win with my dad was during a phone call. And I think I would also just like to raise my hands to CBC, because Rosanna Deerchild, I think single-handedly has like changed my dad's perspective on, and probably changed a lot of people's perspectives. So CBC has done such a great job programming that, you know, and I think everyone knows, you know, my dad won't respect that. Like I have almost a PhD, I'm an expert in this. If he heard me on the CBC, he would probably respect my opinion more than when I'm on the phone with him, unfortunately. I know Jenna's laughing about this, but my biggest win with my dad was we were on the phone and I said, well, here's this and this and this. We're talking about a story that had come up. And then he said, you know, I just think it's all a lot more complicated than I ever thought. And I was like, oh, I won. Like, this is a win, because I think on the simplicity of, I don't know, white people won and Indians are bad. Like, I don't know what that, like, I don't know what the narrative is that justifies the level of racism that is in our institutions, that is all over. There isn't one, but the simplified narrative that settler Canadians work harder, and so that's why Native people are in poverty, or whatever it is that we like, we want to make it simple. And the truth is, it's not. The truth is that as an Indigenous person, I didn't know about the Indian Act until I was in university. And then I learned about the Indian Act, and it legislates most of my life. You know, I'm very, very happy today to be saying, like, I just went to a lawyer's and signed papers to buy a house on my own territory. So whatever stories you've heard about people getting houses, there's no way that I'll get a house on my reserve. I'm fourth generation removed from my biological family. So to be able to actually get access to our land, I would have to have all 7 of my aunties and my uncle pass at some point. And we'd have to have death. We don't even have death certificates for the, it's all getting complicated, but I just want to give you an idea of how complicated these things are, right? We have to get death certificates for our great uncles that were adopted out and ended up somewhere in Seattle in their lives. With, like, I don't know where those people are. And so they're like, how do you actually talk about claim inheritance? And I don't think we talk about it enough. Intergenerational wealth. We are not talking about it enough. So I think one of the questions that I challenge people on is, how did you get here? Because people, I think settler Canadians like to say, I don't know, I just don't know enough about my history. But you actually have documented history. most of you. And I don't want to trigger anyone who, you know, maybe you're an adoptee, maybe you have roots, maybe something's happened. I get that. That is our truth. That is my truth. My biological grandmother died at 37. She had 8 children, all taken away from her. I found out last summer that it is believed by my family that she was actually murdered. The story I was told as a kid was a very different story than I got when I finally reconnected to my family. And I share this because I think we don't think about it. I actually got to be in a conversation with the CEO of tech, which is like, I can't even believe my where I'm at now. I used to talk about consent in love poems, and now I'm talking about consent with the CEO of a mining company. It's kind of fun. But we were talking to him, and I told him about I told them all about the introductions around grandparents, right? So they caught on to that. And when they went around the room and they introduced themselves, he said, oh, my grandfather was at the signing of the golden spike, putting the golden spike in the railroad. And he was sort of sharing this. And I said, oh, that's great. You know, it's interesting to me that that's the story you share. And I say, you know, what we're really trying to do here is we're trying to change the Canadian narrative. So we're trying to change the story of Canada, because the story that we've been taught is just not the truth. It's just, it erases so many people. I just went over to Kaslo for a while, for the first time. And I was visiting there, and I didn't even know there was a Japanese internment camp there. And there's sort of there's some pictures, and that's about it. But it's like these kind of things where I'm starting to learn. Again, I'm sure I learned that in school somewhere, but learning these things, and actually who are the voices that aren't at the table, and why not, right? And what am I doing to actually get them to the table? And also, even when they're at the table, are we acknowledging that they don't own the table, right? Like these kind of things, these complications come up. So I've already gone almost to my time, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna keep going. I know I see Duncan smiling, because I'm like, that's my intro.
You're just warming up. So we've got I've got 3 hours here. If any,
I won't take up too much of your time, but I did want to tell. I talked about decolonization relationships, but I did want to tell a story, and I did talk to my mom about this today, because it's a story. It was funny. I sort of said, as I said, I've told this story all over, but today I realized that some of you might know my mom, and then that might come up. So I did talk to her about this. But I did share about my grandma Patsy, who had passed. My birth mother was part of what's called the 60 Scoop. So she was raised in a white Catholic family in Toronto. And when she became pregnant with me, she was put into a home for unwed mothers. And so I was about 2 months old when I was adopted. And because of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in 1982, then there was Child Welfare Act. Because of the time that I was born, I was actually the ʔamaʔkis First Nation, where I'm from, was called at that time. And so I actually grew up in my nation. And so this is where my sister and my mom come in. And so I was adopted by Barb Cody. And so sometimes I say I'm Ktunaxa squared, because I have both families. I was like, and I always used to say I couldn't date a Ktunaxa because I'm either related by blood or adoption. So it's related to all of the families. So I was raised by my mom Barb, and my grandma Sabina was always around, and always had the best huckleberries, always had the biggest garden. I remember when she passed, we were all shocked because the women from the bank were like, well, I'm gonna miss her huckleberries. And we're like, you were giving just people at the bank huckleberries, and the Dave's Book Bar guy, and like all these people. So I think it's like, you know, she was just deeply generous. And I will say that when I went to DTSS, and actually, like I can remember even earlier, I remember being in Eileen Madsen Primary. I was 6 years old, and another kid told me, you're not like them, you're not dirty like them, referencing Indigenous people. So I want you to know, as educators, how early it begins, and that from then on, in that is one moment, and then there are multiple moments where I was told that I wasn't like them because I was on the honor roll, because I was in band, because I was a good student, because I didn't live on the res, because I wasn't dirty, right? These kind of, all of these different things. And when I share that, I want to say that what's devastating to me in this is that all of those successful things said I wasn't an Indian, which is what the law said. Until 1960, if I got a university degree, if I went to the military, if I got married, any number of things, it meant I was civilized enough to give up my Indian status, which is actually why many of us don't have it now or are fighting back to get it now. And so I think about this, and I think about my grandma, and I used to walk around and I would say, my grandma never taught me anything, because I thought that indigeneity was the beads and the feathers and Pocahontas and that book, which I think is still being taught, Pathkinana, which is written by a white person. Do you have it on there? Yeah, that needs to get off there. That needs to get off there. Let's talk to SD6 soon. But I will tell you, in grade 6, I read a book called Pathkinana, it's called. And when I was 25, I learned the word Pathki is woman. So then I went, oh, wait, I remember this book, and I looked it up, and it's by a white person, and it had nothing to do with me, a young Ktunaxa person. And so it relegates us to the past. We think that being an Indian is something that is different than what it actually is. And it wasn't until I actually started to learn about what it meant to be Ktunaxa that I said my grandma taught me everything about being Ktunaxa. My grandma taught me, she was the person that would give you the shirt off her back. When you walked into her house, food was ready. It was being ready. You were always feeding everyone. You're always laughing. You're always taking care. And there was always a space, and it was a safe space. And I want to share that when my grandmother was a little girl, she went to St. Eugene, and her mother, my mom's granny. So there's granny, and then my grandma Sabina. So granny, Sabina's mother would make her a buckskin outfit every year, beaded buckskin. And grandma Sabina loved it. Like when she was this little girl, she loved her beaded buckskin, and she would get the new outfit, and then they would take her to school. And I don't know if you've been to St. Eugene, and if you ever go there, there's 2 spots, actually. There's a hill, like if you go past and across the river, there's a hill, they call it Crying Hill. And that was the spot for the kids coming from Invermere way, where they would see the school from there and they'd start to cry. Then there's another spot when they could start seeing it coming in from the other side, from Yakanuki or the other side. And so there's another spot that they call over there, that's where we started to cry, this moment. That's how they mark it. And so she would come to the school, her outfit would be taken away, she would be put in a uniform, and then by the end of the school year, which we all know, I'm sure some of you have kids, they've grown out of it. So she never got to actually wear her outfit. And that always devastated her. And when I talk about this, I want to talk about how we talk about residential schools. And I think we have to focus on the truth, and people want to focus on the trauma. And I think we need to know the trauma. You need to know the truth. If you haven't read the TRC report, commit to doing it today. Commit to it. It's on YouTube with people reading it, right? It's 400 pages. Pick a page a day, right? If you really like, whatever you need to do, find a way to take that in. There are stories there that will devastate you. And yet we have to look at those truths. I don't think I'm scarred at all by reading Anne Frank when I was in grade school. I think that I learned to be a more compassionate human being learning about the Holocaust, and that's what we need to do with residential schools. And so, when I share about this, I want to share this story because this is how insidious it is. So my grandma was so in love with these buckskin and beaded outfits, and she was devastated about it. Fast forward to my mom is a teenager. This is one generation, and they grew up in poverty, and she had holes in her jeans, and she brought them to her granny. The granny that, could you sew this up? And granny said, oh yeah, and she put a beautiful beaded patchwork on there. And my mom was horrified. And my mom, I said, when I say poverty, there wasn't money for a new pair of jeans, but she rolled up that pair of jeans and hid it in the back of a closet and never wore it. And when she told me that story, she said, it wasn't cool to be an Indian then. And I think I need you to hear this, because I know we've all had those. I know Jenna wanted to guess jeans. I know we've all had these moments where, the things you want are the things, what's cool. And we know, we're teachers, we know what happens in there. But to see in one generation, the grandmother that wanted that buckskin and was grieving over it, in one generation, the teenager that is horrified and does not want to be proud. And so today I wear my beads, and I wear these things. And I will tell you, people come up and touch, people come up and grab, not since COVID as much. There's some things that I thank the pandemic for, but I think I need to say this because I think you need to realize that we are constantly and every day people still don't understand these things, why we wear them. And I wear it to be proud and to say, I am grateful every day that in my generation, I'm being able to capture and reconnect to this work. So reconnect to honoring my culture. And so I wanted to share that. Thank you. I wanted to share that story because I think that we don't always think about the ways in which like this works when it comes to even just presentation, clothing, all of that. I'm realizing it's getting dark here. I'll try to, it's Kimberly's sun going down here. Darn daylight savings, I tell ya. So I want to end my talk and then we'll open up room for questions. But I want to end with something that I hear probably most often, which is, what can I do? And I share this story because I was privileged to work in and do my PhD at Trent University in Indigenous Studies. And there's a really amazing director of Indigenous knowledge there. His name is Kegedonce Doug Williams. And he's an elder as well. And so I heard him speaking once and I was like, can I use this now? Can I borrow this and quote you on this? Because it just struck me. Somebody in the audience said, well, what can I do? And he said, I don't know, what can you do? And I still laugh because then they go, what do you mean? But what Doug said and how I feel, and I echo this, is that Doug said, I know what I can do. And I know what my strengths are. So for myself, I know I have studied and I've been performing since I was 3 years old, right? Jenna shares, I've been always talking to people, these kind of things. I don't expect you to come and do this work. I don't expect you to do anything that doesn't actually work for you or your strengths. I'm not asking you to be the biggest white savior in the world, right? We don't actually want those. We don't need those. We need people who can recognize your own strengths. What are you actually good at? What have you spent your life learning about? And how do you actually use that to support reconciliation? And so I think that what I often say lately is that we are in a crisis of self-awareness. And so when people come to people like Jenna and myself and go, I need you to teach me, I think, especially as educators, it's offensive. Because if you were to go teach a math lesson, you would go research how to do that math lesson. If you didn't know how to teach a social studies subject, you would go research to teach that subject. So I call on you to treat Indigenous knowledge in the same way that you treat all the other knowledges, and how hard you would learn the science if you were going to teach it to some kids, that you would make sure you understood it. I challenge you to make sure you're understanding it. And you're not going to learn this overnight. And to be honest, we are just in a space now where we are being open to share. It's a beautiful space in 2021, because 10 years ago, my elders would say, you don't talk about that, because everything that was sacred to us had to become secret. Protection became underground. So when you ask Ktunaxa people something and we are quiet, you're asking the wrong question. Often. And if we're, there's certain communication styles and these kind of things, and how do you come and how do you build a relationship and how do you actually learn these things and learn how to learn them, learn how to ask a question, learn how to request from us things, learn how to have a conversation. Because, for example, a pause is very important in our culture. So that we call it like the sacred pause. We have this word at the end, which I'll use in a minute. We have this word that says tachas. That's all I have to say for now. Why would you need a word that signals that you're done? Because if you've ever heard our elders talk, they take a lot of time. They pause. They are paying attention. I was told once that an elder knows that their time is short. And so maybe you only have an hour with them. They will tell you things that you might not understand for a lifetime, because they know they'll say whatever they need to say here. And 4 years down the road, you're going to go, oh my gosh, blows my mind. Time and space is different. I mean, it's not real. Daylight savings just showed us it's not real, right? Like the way COVID showed us, because I know, those days that stretch forever versus the days that are like, what just happened? So the time and space is different in these concepts of when they're talking to you, they're fitting it all in, everything you'll need. And that pause, so those pauses. And so if you think about the world where, how uncomfortable are you in silence? I was very uncomfortable. I was interrupting I was saying my boss sometimes mutes me when I'm interrupting people in meetings. We like the mute button. So I had to learn as well. I had to learn how to interact with my elders and not jump in on those silences and let them choose. And then it comes down to this end of using that word to signal. So it's these kind of things where we don't even understand that the way that we have been trained to communicate is non-Ktunaxa, right? Is colonized. Is we have been learned to fill up space and talk over each other and make sure the agenda moves forward, make sure we're, all of these things. And what I love is that I get to bring back this knowledge. I get to start sharing knowledge because my elders have finally said to us, and we finally come to a point where they've said that it used to be to protect it, it had to go underground. And now to protect it, we have to share, we have to teach, we have to have transmission of knowledge. So yeah, I'm grateful to be here, and I challenge you all to spend time. I say that reconciliation it's yes, on a large scale, it's a line that Canada, we hope, gets across someday, quick. But when it really comes down to it, it's actually a line within all of us. And it's every action. It's an individual. When I say crisis of self-awareness, that's what I think is important. Because I can tell you what my relationship is to our land. I can tell you all about your culture. Can you tell me about your culture? Do you understand what your culture is? Do you understand what it has done? Do you understand what communication style you have learned and how that fits in our land? And when I say that, I have such a gift of a job because I get to go into meetings and say, I know you're worried about your deadline, but you need to realize that if you're talking about a goal, like a timeline, that our timeline is another 15,000 years. So unless your action is contributing to us being here for another 15,000 years, then I'm not as worried about your deadline. And of course I am always, I am also, we have to balance this. It's not saying throw it out, but it's recognizing that the mountains move slow. The mountains move slower than anything we can understand. And that we are mountain people, we are from those mountains. And when you go in there, you start to see, and I'll share this because I think Jenna will like this. As a kid, I just like to read and watch TV, and I didn't like to go out. And my sister likes to bike, and the kids, they do everything, bike and ski and all of this stuff. And I didn't really like to go out there. Well, now I moved to Kimberley, and it's funny, I grew up thinking like, when you drive down the highway and you look at the mountains, it's just like 2D, right? It's just like this. It's just this what they look like. So I moved to Kimberley and I start walking out there, and I finally started to realize, like, when you go into backcountry, when you go in there and there are valleys, there are different trees, there are all this space, this and how Don Sam talks about it. He talks about there's a breadth and depth to our people, to our knowledges, to who we are, that is the same as those mountains, that is the same as those lakes and rivers, like that we and so when you think about feeling like I laughed because when I moved here, I was like, what am I going to do if I see a bear? Like, I've been in the city for 12 years. I'm like, oh my gosh, I saw the bear. It was fine. It scared the crap out of me. I didn't go back in for like another month. That's where I started walking in town. But I think, like, if you think about how prepared do you get to go out into the backcountry, that's how prepared you need to get to come and talk to us about our culture. That's how much you could spend your whole life learning about our culture and still not be culturally competent. And I need you to know that. I need you to know that I've had mental health people come to me and say, I want to be culturally competent in grief. And I say, do you want to run our funerals? And they are like, what? Like, well, if you're culturally competent in our grief practices, then you have a responsibility to run our grief practices. So, like, how culturally competent do you want to be? How much do you want to be responsible for? And if you actually look at your responsibility, you are responsible for your classroom, those minds, and so how do you actually look at that responsibility and in teaching those things, rather than trying to, learn, I don't know, whatever you want to learn from us. I really just challenge to learn about yourself and your own history, that truth first. So I did say I would wrap up. I want to say the final thing I said I would say this in my abstract, but we had a group of 20 elders, and we sat down with them and we said, okay, we want to talk about this word reconciliation, because all these partners keep coming to us and saying, we want to reconcile, we want to do reconciliation, we want to, you know, this like, it's always, we want to do reconciliation. You're like, okay, I don't know what that means. And so we talk about it. Reconciliation is also an English word, right? And we talk about, if you think about it, it's like balancing books or like accounting, like this, all the ways we think about reconcile is like super interesting. Or like in a disagreement. Well, I think this is a little more than a disagreement. I think we're in an abusive relationship, and I think that we need to recognize that. And to start with is that it's not balanced, and it's Lee Miracle, who I would like to say her name, and I know she's ill, so I'd like to ask that we all just put a thought out that she makes it through. But Lee Miracle is an incredible writer, incredible storyteller, has been writing for years and years and years. Please go find her work. But she says, yeah, well, if you're standing on my foot and you apologize for standing on my foot, like, fine, but get off my foot first, right? Like, you can't keep standing there and, you know, this kind of, and then going, I'm sorry, right? And that's just abuse. That's, I'm sorry, and then doing it again. I'm sorry, and doing it again. That's abuse. It's textbook. So I think we have to look at this word. And we said to the elders, what reconciliation and what would the Ktunaxa word be? And they were like, and what did I just tell you? When you're silent, they're asking the wrong question, but it was totally silent. And we went, okay, well, like, and we're trying to find ways to talk to them. Well, what about if you're not talking to your sister? What happens? How do you reconcile that? And then they were sitting there and they're looking at each other, the sisters, and they're going, well, I don't know. One of us just picks up the phone. And it's like, well, do you ever apologize? Like, no, we don't have I'm sorry in Ktunaxa. We have the understanding of responsibility and reciprocal, but we don't have that, like, that apology thing. And so we had to talk about it. And I will, I have a statement that they came up with, which I didn't share here, but I will get shared on the site. So there is a statement of reconciliation that they came up with, and it was basically just saying that this is the truth. What happened to us is true. Don't change a statement, and like, pay attention to what the truth is. And so I'll leave you with that, to say that, you know, even in this, when we're using all these words, to recognize that they're not in our language and that they're not in our understanding. And we have to go to your courts to fight for our land and our kids. And, you know, the biggest part of this is, like, you know, this, you see the Supreme Court justice say, like, welcome us into the courtroom, and it's Beverly McLaughlin, your Supreme Court of Canada, when we were there for ʔamaʔk, you know, said the first words out of her mouth was, we're here to for the court case of Ktunaxa versus, you know, so and it's like, they can't even show us that respect in their own courts, right? So in your own court. So these are the ways this works. And so I'm sure that I've probably started going too far now, so I will leave you with that, because it's a lot. So it's like, it's a lot. So thank you so much. Yeah, Tachas. I was like, is there anything else? Tachas.
Oh, Smokii, you did not disappoint. Thank you, Cook's Jam. Wow, that was so powerful. Oh, I'm so proud of you. Yeah, so if there are any questions, I haven't ran a Zoom meeting before as the host, so I'm not really sure what to do. Duncan, help me.
You know, I think we could put it out there in the chat, or if, you know, if people have questions, they can unmute themselves. So, you know, and I think, you know, appreciate that some people have to go, and we'll post this recording. My apologies, and I even said that to Jenna beforehand, that I was gonna, like, write it on my hand to click record, but we, you know, we did capture or record most of that, so we will post that. And for all of you who've been with us, we'll have that on that website after. So yeah, I think just in whatever way you want to pose questions, and yeah, I'll shut up now and let you take it away, Jenna.
Yeah, so either way, you can, I guess, raise a hand or unmute yourself, or you can write in the chat.
I did just have a question, a private question about citing me, and feel free, it'll be recorded. And, you know, again, citation, thank you for the asking, but just to let everyone know, feel free. I'm out there. There's like, I'm always nervous when people go, oh, I've heard your name. And I go, I don't even know what I said in that talk, but no, I do feel like this one's good. So.
Oh, Smokii. There's just some nice things in the chat that people are saying.
Yeah, I'm just reading some of the, I had to message my friend who's watching from downstairs. I was like, could you come turn on a light? So I don't get off because it's starting to get dark here. So you could just start talking.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, hi, my name is Dave. And I'm sorry I missed the first part of your presentation. I'll watch it later. I was teaching a class. But as a little after I came in, you were talking about sort of how you see maybe what our responsibilities as teachers might be, you know, and how it's not really to you know, sort of be Ktunaxa or have, you know. And I guess my question is, like, one of the ways that I've been trying to reach Aboriginal youth. I just moved here from Vancouver Island, so it was Ktunaxa, but is by trying to incorporate those like ways of knowing or ways of teaching, but they're very foreign to me. So I do end up calling on asking for people to come in and asking for help with that. And it's very hard. Like, it took me a long time to learn what little I know of Ktunaxa culture, because you can't just go to the library and read about it very much, really. Like, I've tried, there is some, it's out there, you know, there's like Richard Atleo and stuff, but there's not that much of it, right? And there's so much to know. And so I don't know, there's a question in here somewhere, I guess, but it's like, how do I, if it's not by, you know, trying to learn what I can of the culture and the way, more, not so much the specifics, but the, like, because that's the conversation I had with a friend of mine who's he's from Victoria, and he's in an Aboriginal education program. He's a native guy, and I asked him, how do I reach these kids, because they're not doing as well over there. They're not graduating, right? And so and he said, well, I think you need to learn, like, the instead of learning the content, teach in that, try to learn how to teach more in that way, you know, in the way that we, you know. And so I guess the question is, how do I do that if I'm not, like, I don't want to be doing a crappy job of teaching some, you know, like a sacred ceremony or something, like be like a jerk, but I also, you know what I mean? Like, I want to try to, so how do I reconcile like that? Or how do I do that?
How do I reconcile? That's a great question.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of things that came up in there. So, I mean, when you hear you should try and teach more like them, it's interesting to me that you went to sacred ceremony.
Well,
because I think that's where, and I know, like, this is this idea, right? Teaching from an Indigenous perspective is just human centric. Teaching from a settler perspective is not, right? Unfortunately, you're in a system, and this is where you're screwed. I'm like, I don't know how to answer you, because you're in a system that is colonial. So if you're saying indigenize a classroom, well, first of all, everything in a classroom is a rectangle. Do you know that shape doesn't exist in nature? Why are we sitting at desks that are rectangle? Why are we sitting in chairs? I saw this hilarious meme thread of teachers, how they lean on kids' desks the other day. It was all these pictures, people putting in like Twitter of kids leaning on kids' desks. Like, it's an anti-human environment. And I know that I'm saying stuff that's taboo, but I think you all probably know this because you all had to teach on Zoom this year, and that's very anti-human in its own way. So when you say, how do you reach these kids? And I say this with respect, you're in a system that was designed to annihilate Indigenous people. That system has not ended because residential schools ended. Your system is not designed for us to do well. It's just not. It's not designed. And I think there's this when you're learning, it's actually relationships with the kids that are going to help them. Culture saves lives, and relationships save lives. And as a trans person, I'll tell you that one supportive adult in a trans kid's life, they've done studies on this, one supportive adult using pronouns and names can be the difference, can completely stop suicide crisis. So there's two things here. you are all up against a mountain, right? So if you want to solve why Indigenous kids aren't graduating, like that's not, you can't wholeheartedly, like it's impossible for you to do all of that, because the stuff that is facing our kids, and I will tell you, my 21-year-old sister just had 3 deaths in the last year, including her boyfriend, her auntie, and her one of her elders. Like, and it's like, this is the level that we're dealing with. And so when you talk about this, like, and I say it like, I don't mean to be hopeless, but I do, when I teach, I've been teaching future teachers. And I would like to tell you that future teachers are the worst, because you all want to get the A, you all want to have the rubric, you all want to have when future teachers are the ones that are like, how do I do this right? And I'm sorry to tell you, there's no right way to do reconciliation. You're going to screw it up, and you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to, like, that's the space we have to look at. But I think when we actually ask the question, what are the values? And I think, yes, you get challenged to say, trying to learn Nuu values, trying to learn Ktunaxa values. And a lot of people say nation specific is really important. But I actually say, what is it that you're doing in everyday life to understand Indigenous culture? So I want to know, what are you reading on your bedside table if you're a reader? Is it Indigenous literature? What music are you listening to? Is it Indigenous music? Who are you following on social media? How are you embracing the fact that Indigenous culture is the fastest growing, Indigenous people are the fastest growing and youngest population in Canada, and we're actually winning all your Canadian awards. We're actually coming in and doing things better than people, like the writing and the music and all these things. And so how are you actually putting yourself in this space of learning holistically? And actually, the question you always ask me, and that I always get asked, is how do I learn? What I want to know is, how are you unlearning? How are you unlearning what you got taught in your bachelor's degree? How are you unlearning what you got taught in how to be a good teacher? Do you know where that how to be a good teacher came from? And if you actually trace it back to the systems of thought that it is attached to, do you know why you are in school from whatever 9 to 3? Do you know why? Like, these kind of questions and these kind of issues. And I'm here for a revolution. I'm not here for you. I'm here for 15,000 years, right? And so I know I don't ever get to the details. I don't ever get to say, this is how you can do it step by step by step. Because when it comes down to it, classrooms are not safe spaces for us. And we want to call them safe spaces. You have to go safer spaces or braver spaces, because as an Indigenous person, as a trans person, like there's no, even when I was teaching, my classroom could become unsafe with one comment from many comments that I had to deal with. But I think we have to recognize that you can't do it all. And I'm sorry, I don't want to be hopeless here. You can't do it all. But I will share the one thing that when I first started teaching, and I started teaching in a really weird way, because I was a PhD candidate. I was in my first year, and my supervisor actually got something happened. He got suspended, and later he resigned. And I took over a class, and I was terrified. And I went into sweat with Elder Merritt Taylor from Curve Lake, Anishinaabe, and I was talking to him, and I was like, I just want to be a good teacher. And he gave me, and I think this is where we get to, like, it's so simple, it's hard. But he said to me, you just need to be kind. He said, sometimes you're the only bit of kindness they see in a day. And I think that's the space of, you have an impossible task given to you. And so how often can you actually say, like, this curriculum, this stuff, if it's hurting your students, how often do you actually pay attention to where they are? How often, and can you, and how do we make ourselves more human? And hey, I'm a boss and I get frustrated. And like, now that I have staff, I'm like, oh, I can't just fail them. Like, oh no, like, I'm like, I have to see them next week. Like, there's no end of semester here. So I'm learning now. And I'm not saying it's easy. And I'm not saying this is lifetime of work. And and you've been called to teaching because I know you care. And I know it's hard. And so I think on one hand, don't be too hard on yourself, because it's a lifetime of work. And also ask, what am I doing responsibly to think differently every day, to find that space of compassion, of love, of respect, whatever it is. to say, you know, and I know there's people in here, like I have friends who is like an OT who's like, you know, he had to speak back to some of the school teachers to say, no, I'm going to take, this kid's going to stay out here for a little while. I'm going to take a little extra time with this kid because this kid needs it. We're teaching our kids that their feelings and all this stuff doesn't matter, and they have to sit in a desk, and it's all, you know, how are we actually creating kids that are going to survive the next 20 years? I don't know. It's terrifying. And I think that I commend you and I lift my hands up to you, and I don't mean to shame you in this way. I mean to ask, like, I wish you all the best. And I hope that there was something in this talk that opens your heart and that you find those moments. But what I need to say is that teachers saved my life, but no question to me, teachers saved my life. And I think that if I went back to some of those teachers, they wouldn't even think that they did what they did. They wouldn't even know what they did. And so I think that's the space that I need you to know. And then I also need you to know that graduation isn't the biggest deal. I have 3 guys right now that didn't graduate high school who are becoming the head wildlife advisory for the Ktunaxa Nation Council because they spent more time on the land, and they can tell us about elk, they can tell us about predators, they can tell us about noxious weeds. And one of them is now talking about biology, and we've just hired a scientist to work with him because he has the knowledge that works in his way. And so sometimes I think we need to stop thinking about the way that you've been taught what success is. That's an issue as well. For me, success is I'm 5 years sober, right? Success is that my sister and I are getting along and we're talking today and she's introducing me in this thing, right? Like that, like success is about relationship to me. And so I think we have to remember that you have numbers, you have a system that tells you, you have to graduate kids, you have to do this, you have to reach these deadlines. But I just challenge all of us, especially in this year and these 2 years. I call 2020 the year of excavation, and then it just continued. That if we aren't changed by the end of these 2 years, if we aren't seeking out how to be more loving and kind and connected to each other, then we need to be. And it's devastatingly hard in this end of late stage capitalism. And I just need to say, I don't think it's getting any better. And we have to be able to say, we're going to come from care and kindness as much as possible. And I know that maybe didn't answer your question. I see my sister's hand up because I'm sure she wants to speak to this too. So I know that was a big answer to your question, but that's where I come from. So.
Go Smokii, go. Sorry, I think, was your name Dave?
Yeah.
Okay, so I do have some suggestions, and we can chat more about this as well. So Smokii does have valid points, and yes, of course, all of that. But we can also, then my first thing would be getting outside, right? Like there's through seeding, there's tons of different opportunities that it doesn't have Indigenous perspective. It doesn't have to be having the elders in or the knowledge keepers. It really is just connecting with the land, right? Where are we? What is around us? And that really is the first step. It's just like knowing where you're from. And Smokii said that a lot about the Ktunaxa people. It's all about the land. It's all about the mountains. And it's so if you just get the kids outside and you don't even have to have a lesson. It's just like observation of what's going on. The seasons, the moons, the stars, the sun. What are all those types of lessons? And I think just there isn't lots of Ktunaxa resources out there. I get that. I'm all about the books. Like I love, and I have tons of books, and we can talk about that another time. But I lost my train of thought. It's just, yeah, like just being out there, I think is most important. And just that you're trying every day. Like your question is, it shows that you care and that you want to learn more, and that's the most important thing. And right, it's all about the kids and wanting to make them feel safe. So that's just, yeah. And you can email me or we can, and I have some different resources that can be maybe just a little stepping stone for you to get some ideas.
Yes, and I love this because I'm always the philosopher, like a poet that comes in and is like, I don't know how you can do your job. Good luck, because I didn't teach in that level because for these specific reasons. In fact, I was teaching at college level first year, and I was too overwhelmed by trying to. What I say is I was trying to pour the ocean into paper cups, and it was just not working. But I think that I raised my hands to all of you, and Jenna is somebody who works for the school district and is helping. And I think please, she can provide more of the concrete resources. I like to come in and philosophize. And I did say earlier in my talk, I'm two-spirit. I say the taboo things. It's part of my role in community. So that's why I like to lecture the future teachers, but I do it in a hopeful way. That's like love, kindness, care. And the other thing that I said, and I mentioned, like talking about like willow bark was Indigenous knowledge. So I think we need to remember too that like every subject you have, if you can just find a way to talk about like social studies, geography, whose land are we on, right? Science, where did medicine come from? Like there's all sorts of, whatever facet you're in, there are conversations to be had. And I also do just want to acknowledge Golden is tough because it is sort of a shared, it's an overlap territory space. And so I know there's not a lot of resources up there. Just again, you can also blame your governments for creating reserves because that they put us where we are now. So that's why you don't have Indigenous people in Golden, a reserve in Golden where you can actually ask for help. So you can blame them for that. But no, just that's my levity around reserve systems. But of course, when I say all this hopelessness, I actually am raising my hands, and I think teachers have a very difficult job, and I commend all of you. And I do think that recognizing that what your systems are asking you to do is like it's an incredible ask. And I think that as long as we're actively working day to day. So one of the questions we have is kin hookin, and it's like, did you do it? Did you finish it? So my chief Nisukan Jason Louis said to me, at the end of every day, you ask that, did you do it? Did you finish it? And so that's that. If I can leave you with something is in the morning, I'll leave you. Actually, this is a really good one for teachers. I've had very, very good teachers. So there was the kindness talk, and then my ceremony, the late Carol Edelman Warrior, my ceremony mom, one time, and I was living with her, and one time I was teaching online, and I was like, oh, I hate my students. They're just driving me crazy and blah, 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 blah. And she just looked at me and she went, go get your tobacco and go out and pray for each one of them by name. And I was like, I don't want to do that. So then I was like, of course, but if you get told you do this. So I went and I got my tobacco and I went outside and I started, and by the third name in, it changed. Because it's like, they're human, I'm grateful for them, and they're people. And when we start thinking about them as numbers and trying to get them, that's where, it's tough and you've got all this stress. But if we can take that breath, right, all we have is the moment with them. And so I think that those spaces, and then just being like, it's been a hard few years for all of us. And I think just coming from that space. Oh, thank you. I know people are leaving. I'm like, it's 5:30, it's past 5:30, but of course I could talk all day, but yeah, no. So I do want to say that it's tough on either way, but the undoing is as important as the doing. And so finding ways to start thinking differently, just in general. Like I, for example, grew up with terrible, I want to be vulnerable here, terrible anti-Asian racism, like to a level that I'm shocked by now. But like, so I started to go, okay, how am I going to learn and unlearn this? And so I started to actually actively seek out Chinese thinkers and writers, and even like Kim's Convenience on it, like trying to find BIPOC stuff on Netflix is hard, but like just exposing myself to more of that. And I think that's the best way to do any of this. And that's one of my easiest reconciliation challenges that I tell people is to try. What do you like? Because if you like podcasts, they're out. Indigenous podcasts are out there. All My Relations is a really great one. If you like Audible, there's Indigenous writers everywhere. If you like whatever it is, I mean, I think that we relegate Indigenous people to this. We've been taught this stereotype about us, but we actually do all sorts of. We have metal bands. We have, classical musicians. So yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Oh, I could listen for a few hours. Thank you. Like,
no, they're so sweet.
It's good. It's so great to see all that. Thank you for all being here. It's so hard in Zoom, and I hope someday I get to do this in person again.
It's Smokii, you're just so honest and truthful. And I think a lot of the time we try and make sure that we're not saying the truth because we don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but it really is important to say those truths and for everyone to hear them, because you're really, I mean, that's what has happened is we're in a colonized system and we don't even know what we're doing when we're doing it. And so yeah, it's really nice and enlightening to hear your thoughts, because it really does help. And especially teachers, like even us thinking like, oh my gosh, a square box with square desk with a little spot to put our stuff, like, oh my gosh, it's yeah. And the big thing happening right now is it's all about the gap. We want to close the gap with our Indigenous students. And this is one thing that I'm trying to answer. And it was such a breath of fresh air for you to say, well, I mean, this system isn't made for Indigenous people. And yeah.
Well, and if closing that gap exists hugely in every area of Indigenous life.
Yeah.
So we have to talk about health. We have to all these systems, right? So that gap is not just your responsibility. And I want, like, it's like when we think about that, closing the gap and this idea, again, whose success, whose level of success are we asking about? And if you look at someone I'll give you one. So I have I talked about one of the medicine people I know, and he said, you know, sometimes, yeah, it's good for people to quit drinking, but if somebody's drank for their whole life, like he's like, I went to someone on their deathbed and I brought them a bottle because it was the right thing to do, because they needed that spirit to help. Like it had become such a part of them that we talk about harm reduction or this medicine, right? And these different ways of thinking, and I learned this through talking to some of the social workers and mental health workers in my community, was that success is very different in a context of somebody who's been addicted and say experiencing houselessness for 12 years or something, right? And this, what do we think success is, and how do we teach that, and how are we creating those gaps? Like, and I think we have to recognize that. And as in education and employment, what I'm doing in KNC now is I'm saying, you know, capacity building, they would say it's getting the Ktunaxa into the job. Well, I'm going, do I care as much about whether the Ktunaxa is good enough for the job title? I actually care more about whether the job title is good enough for the Ktunaxa, if it's actually making sense for us. Another example is somebody who, this company was so proud of getting a permanent contract, whatever. They hired someone, within 3 months he had left. And the community members were like, well, yeah, because he lives off the land most of the year. He probably only needed 3 months salary. So nobody talked to him about that, right? So these kind of things of like, what are we actually what is success? What is that kid like? How do you actually get that kid liking that thing rather than worrying about, are they passing math? I learned that many of the Ktunaxa passed math because of a specific tutor in Cranbrook. So I was like, now I know. I'm like, that's great. Like, I was like, there's like someone that they know and they go, oh, go to her, right? Because she'll help. But like, and I don't know what she did. I can't give you her magic. But I think recognizing, right, like, this idea, yes, education is important, but I also, again, taboo. People say education's a new buffalo, and I say, I don't know, the buffalo is still the buffalo. Like, we still need that. And I'm going, why didn't I pay attention more when mom was canning? I'm going, well, I need mom to come help me grow the garden now. And I'm like, I'm moving to a new house. I'm like, I've got chickens. I'm starting to think differently, right? And we have to think differently. We saw that in COVID. I mean, hoarding toilet paper, whatever. What happens if those grocery stores shut down? Are we ready? Are our kids ready? Do I care if they graduated math? Of course I do, but I also have to ask the question of what else do they know and what else are they learning? So anyways, that's my anti-education talk. It's like terrible. Thanks. Thank you so much. I'm like, it's good, but I like seeing all the faces. Thank you for nodding along and agreeing, because it's so hard. It's so hard. Find the power in each child. Thank you. Thank you. I love this sharing from Nisukan Joe Pierre of ʔamaʔkis, our chief, who works for School District 5. He said, find the power in each child. That's from Ktunaxa. We come from strength-based. So we actually, instead of going, you have to be good at all these things, we go, what are you good at, right? And you know, that becomes your role in the community. So for example, our Christopher Horsethief, who's created our app, which also Ktunaxa language app. It's amazing. There's a First Voices app, but there's another Ktunaxa language app that actually does quizzes. So if you don't have that one, seek it out, because it's like it does quizzes, and he's set it up so that if you get one wrong, it like scolds you the way the aunties do. It's like it like has a line that's like, Zina, you know, you've forgotten this. It's quite funny.
Can you put it in the
I can, oh yeah, I'm sure I can. I don't know.
or you can give it to me and
I'll
can
give
send
it to you
in
with the statement for reconciliation. Yeah, because that's a fantastic app. But but he was given that role. He was actually in a medicine dance, and they looked at him and they said, you are going to be doing technology. Technology is your work. And so that's another thing that, like, when we look at what our roles are, we get told what our roles are. We get placed where we're supposed to go. And so, you know, whatever goals teachers have compared to what our nation has for you might not line up, right? And I'm not saying we don't want our kids to graduate. Of course we do. But I would rather have our kids alive than graduating. That's the, like, of course, that's my key, right? Keep them alive. And I feel like I can thank you for that. We can get them their grade 12. But we need you to keep them there as much as you can. And I don't ever blame anyone. That's not me saying that if kids have, but I know for myself, I was suicidal for most of my life. Still sometimes fight with it, but as a kid. And I will just tell you that the ones that saved me were the ones that were just reached out, that just paid it, that when I went to treatment when I was 17, my grade 7 teacher wrote me a letter, right? Like these kind of things, these little moments. All of this space of like, and you know it as teachers, you know those kids, and you're not going to connect with everyone. And I know that we fight ourselves on the ones we don't connect with, but remember the ones you do, because those are the ones that, like, you just got to trust that the teacher in the next grade might connect with that other one, or that someone else is out there. But pay attention and give yourself the what fills you up, right? What fills you up, and pay attention to those things, and recognize those things. So the last thing I'll say is that we get taught to wake up grateful. And believe me, I'm not. I usually wake up going, ugh, but like then I had to turn it around. So Dan Joe would say, I do 10 chin-ups while I'm watching the sun. The late Dan Joe, we miss him. But so that finding a way to get yourself in that good headspace first, whatever it is, listen to a song, whatever it is. I'm sure you know, on the way in, all those things, taking that extra 30 seconds to take the breath. When I put the armor on, I played my song, I got ready, I came in here to talk, I got ready. We changing that energy to come in as in our best selves as best as we can. And then whenever we push out of that best self, just being aware of it. Because it's not saying we're going to be there all the time, and it's not shaming, but it's just being aware of it. So how do we get back to the gratitude? How do we get back? How do we go out and pray for each one of them by name? How do we get back to the kindness? It's so hard in our world today, where the disconnect has hurt everyone, right? Colonialism has hurt all of us. And so how do we actually find those connections? And then at sundown now, right? Did you do it? Did you do it? And I think that if you can every day, and it's not every day for me, but the days that I can remember those things and pay attention. And when you ask, did you do it? It's the day. And how beautiful is that? We're not looking at grade 12. We're not looking at even June. We're not looking at we have to plan in all those different ways. But at the end of the day, can you feel good about what you did? Did you finish? And I think that's when I think about that, and when I can get into presence and that self-awareness and that mindfulness, that's when I'm at my best self. That's when I'm able to do this work. And so I just pass that one on to you, because I think if we can stay in those present moments, there's so much chaos and so much anxiety and so much stuff pulling us everywhere. But if we can just stay present with a kid, you know, for a little longer than we did yesterday, then I think that makes the difference. So thank you, everyone. And I wish you all well in this journey. I wish you all, like, I hope that your loved ones are healthy. When we pray in the beginning, we usually pray about everyone coming together with one heart. And when we leave, we say, you know, we hope everyone gets home safe. Some of you are in your homes already, but that as you transition into that next place, that you carry something stays with you, and that you remember, and that we all get through this world. We all know that there's a time coming when we won't be here anymore. So what can we do to help the young ones? I keep saying the 2020 babies who are going to save the world. I know quite a few of them, so thank you.
Well, thank you once again, Smokii. It has been, I mean, it's been amazing. And once again, I'm learning from my little bro, and it's so wonderful. So thank you for that. And I'm happy to take any, if anyone has any emails, like questions that come up, you can email me and I can give them to Smokii. And yeah, it feels weird that we're ending the presentation and I have nothing to give you. So I do have stuff to give you, but it's just not at this time. So that's just one thing that our grandma did our whole lives, is she did not go anywhere without bringing something. And that's just what we do. And that's just, so I don't know. I must be tired now. But yeah, thank you everyone who showed up today. You are so brave, and we have we're so thankful for you too. So I want everyone to have a safe travel home and have a wonderful night, and enjoy your day off tomorrow, and take time for all the veterans, and of course our Indigenous veterans that are still here too. So
thank you. And I just saw Kelly in the chat from the US. Yes, what a world in the US. It's so different. But there are many amazing people down there. Joy Harjo. I'm like, there's so many amazing people. So just learn from the Indigenous voices as best you can. Thanks. Wishing you all well.